You're tuned in to Reimagine 2021, version 11, the #1 virtual crypto and blockchain conference. In this next segment, our expert speakers talk about the many drawbacks of using DAOs.
And we've talked a lot about the positive aspects of DAOs. What are some drawbacks or limitations you see of DAOs?
Yeah, I think any structure that is governed by a large group is going to be less efficient than an organization governed by a small group, right? One of my favorite quotes in the investment world is an investment committee should be an odd number and 3 is too many. Because groups, right, it's just tough to get them together. It's tough to have them make the decision you as the head of the group want. So there will be some dynamics that people have to get used to. If you think about hierarchies with a very powerful CEO, with a crony board, they can make decisions very quickly. They can react very quickly. They can monopolize very quickly. In a DAO first world, you have to convince the community, right, that your proposal to change the governance structure is a good one. And then you have to get people to actually see that there was a proposal. You got to get people to vote on the proposal. So there are definitely implementation challenges to a DAO first world. You have the typical criticism that not everybody who participates in every organization is qualified to participate in governance. And again, I don't like that school of thought, but I guess there's some truth to it. Not everybody is as informed, but to me, voting broadly is a good example of that, right? We just had election day yesterday, and some would say, oh, we should go back to how it was, that the landowners, voted on behalf of the people that lived on the land because those people weren't educated enough. I'm like, no, that's BS. Everyone should have a vote. And we should do it through blockchain, and we should know the results instantaneously, and we shouldn't have the question of vote early, vote often, like in Chicago, or don't vote at all because you couldn't get to the polling place. Punch it on your phone, simple to identify on a blockchain, but we haven't gotten there yet. A lot of vested interest in there. But everyone should, I think, have a vote, even if they may or may not be quote unquote qualified. So I think, but I do think that is a implementation challenge of a DAO world. I think another challenge is just the legacy systems fighting the transition. And what they'll do first is they'll throw up regulatory roadblocks and say, well, that isn't legally viable. Right? We've seen a little bit of that. I think Wyoming's the only state that has said a DAO is a legal form of ownership. And so states could fight it. And I think they will, right? I mean, we're in that first, then they fight you stage. So I think that's a challenge to overcome. And then, there are technical challenges. Everyone talks about the DAO in 2016 that got hacked. Well, it wasn't the structure that got hacked. It was the, custody of the assets. And look, you can put your assets at an exchange with, 2 guys and their dog. You might deserve to get stolen. You don't really deserve it, but you might get it stolen. If you go to a Coinbase or a Kraken or a Gemini, you're not likely to get things stolen. So it wasn't the structure that got hacked, it was the custody that got hacked.
I would say the biggest drawback for DAOs right now is probably the gray area they're kind of in, and whether or not they're set up legally, whether they're in violations of SEC laws, all that kind of fun stuff that still applies to tokens, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain stuff. I've heard stories already of people, groups of people getting together, trying to create their own funds, spin up a DAO, they do a private raise, and then they seek legal counsel, because legal counsel in blockchain is insanely expensive. And there's very few experts in the field. And basically they go to their legal counsel, and the legal counsel is like, no, you got to give that money back like right away. Like, whoa, you like stop. Like, let's like go back, do this properly. And so I think it's tricky because like on one side, in order to have a competitive advantage in this space and like be first and like, do things quickly, you want to take these risks. But in some cases, we don't know what the repercussions of a lot of those risks are going to be. So you have to like have like a balance of like risk tolerance and proper like guidance and compliance. I think the only way blockchain will ever get to a point where we want it to be and where it's mainstream and like adopted in everyday life is there needs to be like clear frameworks and regulations and like compliance. And that's for everything, DAOs, NFTs, crypto, et cetera. And it's difficult because right now every country has kind of different ways they treat it. So I think if there's any sort of advice I can give on like people who are getting into DAOs, it's just like, you can do it, just make sure you're getting proper guidance from like legal experts. It's gonna cost money, but you have to think of that as an investment in your future and your safety, like going forward.
DAOs right now, I think the biggest limitation across the board is this idea that it's the solution for everything. That's happened with anything in crypto, right? You have blockchain. The blockchain doesn't solve world hunger. I mean, it might in some indirect way, which I don't really know how to articulate now, but it's not gonna solve world hunger just because it's on chain, right? So same thing with DAOs. Just because a DAO is this kind of has this narrative that's very democratizes certain things or puts power in the individual, things that we've been talking about over the last hour or so, just because it has that promise also doesn't mean that it's a solution for everything. And I think that's the tension that we're seeing now is a lot. I'm sure there's a handful of projects that are saying, oh, let's do a DAO right now, and it may not be the right time to do it, or maybe it's not a right time to ever do it. Or maybe on the flip side, there might be people who are even too skeptical and they're saying, oh, well, we're not going to go into a DAO because it's just too esoteric and too difficult to understand, and perhaps the DAO is actually exactly the right solution. I think maybe the conclusion here is if you want this community and you want to align incentives, one possible route that is a really good solution is a DAO. There's also other ways to do it, but that's one possible route.
The limitation that I see today is really just the infrastructure has not been developed yet, and that's not such a big limitation. It'll definitely get solved in the coming months and years. And so as the infrastructure becomes more robust, we'll start to see more adoption of DAOs. Another limitation that I see is how the structures of DAOs will be, right? Like, how will they be structured? Will there be a hierarchy? What will that hierarchy mean? And I feel like that is an advantage that centralized entities have at the moment, right? They have a clear leadership with a clear vision. There are teams, there's a hierarchy, there are expectations and goals to be met, and they have access to human capital and financial capital, and they deploy it with precision. And so we're yet to see that and how that's going to play out with DAOs. But I have no doubt that that's going to be something that we'll see in the coming future. And we've seen this kind of theme in the crypto space where there is a new innovation that happens and it works, and then other projects and teams start to copy that. And at first, it's just everybody's doing that one same thing, but then you start to see variations of it. We saw that when Binance, for instance, launched a centralized exchange with a utility token, right? That was an innovation. As far as I know, they were probably the first one to do that. And with the success of that, we started to see other centralized exchanges starting to follow in that footsteps and launching these tokens. And with DeFi, we see the innovation of yield farming, which was just an amazing growth hacking technique. And we're still seeing the same techniques being applied, but with slight variations, right? So there are projects that are now trying to innovate around that model, trying to see what could work better in that sense. And so with DAOs, we'll probably start to see some sort of a standard being set, and then we'll see other DAOs, following the same standards, and then it'll start to innovate and evolve into even better models over time.
It's not easy to coordinate. The easiest thing for anybody to do is do something that somebody else told them to. And that's how corporate structure works. You have one person at the top who is the visionary, who says, we're going to go this direction, and everybody follows them. And that's easy. It doesn't require any sort of personal growth innovation. It doesn't even require you to figure out what you're going to do on a given Tuesday afternoon. DAOs are very, very different. because you have to get out of bed yourself, go and sign into the DAO and figure out what it is you're going to do. So that makes it much more difficult than having somebody say, be at your desk at 9 a.m., type out these TPS reports, and come back in 6 hours and I'll give you a paycheck. So that's really, really difficult. The other thing that's difficult that we can crack, because it's a technological hurdle, not a mental model hurdle, is the coordination through the various different tools online, right? There are some really great ones out there already. DAO House is a fantastic framework for DAOs. Aragon is another fantastic framework. There are some that are coming, like Tribute DAO, who has a brilliant way of forming this various different structures on top and inside of what a DAO ends up being. Same with projects like Orca Protocol or Colony, who have DAOs within DAOs within DAOs. So it's kind of like turtles all the way down. But what that allows you to do is coordinate on a large scale across many different initiatives, which becomes really, really powerful. But those products and those tools aren't live yet. Well, some of them are live, but they're not widely adopted. And that's what we have to get to. And there's also payroll, and there's also, recognizing contributions. The tools are starting, we'll get there, but those are some close hurdles for us to get over.
I think that there are a couple of DAOs, I'm not gonna name names, that I've participated in where I just found that, when the community is not in the right mindset, like when a DAO is created for the sake of creating a DAO, or when a DAO is created just for monetary reasons, a lot of times it goes sideways. But I think a lot of it is related to the purpose and mission behind the DAO. And I want to emphasize again why the approval process is so important, because you want to have the right people come in, the right people who have the right ideas and opinions about what they want to create in the space. That's more than just making money. That's more than just creating a DAO for the sake of creating a DAO.
So now the biggest limitation, in my opinion, is just the lack of clear best practices, how to structure the governance. And usually it's pretty ineffective at the end. So yeah, so it should be a balance between like completely open voting and some, I don't know, quick decisions. So always like when you have this open voting, it's pretty slow. Yeah, and it's good for investment DAOs, actually. It works pretty well because it's rare. You have to have like one decision in a month or something, so it could be done in this open voting way. It's perfect. But for DAOs that work with the products, you have to create to do like a lot of operational decisions, so it doesn't work well. Yeah, and nobody is actually figure out. I guess Maker, by the way, Maker DAO, they have a pretty interesting structure. They almost like replicate their corporate structure, but in a way of like decentralized groups working together. It's pretty cool, interesting, but it's always this is like a one of the kind, so there is no like several other DAOs doing the same thing, because it's hard, really. Like it's not so easy. I mean, it's lots of like procedures and processes they made, so it's hard to replicate. So the lack of these frameworks just stopping DAOs from being effective.
How do you think decentralized governance can fix some of the problems with government?
You mean with kind of country governments or what?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, how to fix? I don't know. In my opinion, the problem isn't here with governments. It's the problem somewhere else, not about like just DAOs or the process of the voting. Usually it's on some social level rather than technical.
Are DAOs scalable? You have a bunch of members, community members, core members. moderators, right? Different rules depending on how you want to take how they want to take that on. Is that scalable to execute, to present proposals, have participation amongst the greater community? How do you see DAOs? Are DAOs scalable?
I think DAOs are scalable, but you've expressed a bunch of key challenges in terms of what happens with large community stakeholders. There's no way that I can vote on even all the issues that are in front of all the DAOs that I am participating in as an individual stakeholder. So I think we're going to see a lot of cool stuff around the pioneering of delegated voting, right? This ability to say, I trust your judgment on this set of issues and I'm going to delegate to you my voting rights. So I think that could be incredibly powerful, and I think it will offer some really interesting pictures about how enterprises could evolve, because the level of shareholder participation in many enterprises is actually very low. And perhaps our whole economy would be better served with a higher level of engagement across the board.
I think there is a challenge of opaqueness. Who is actually running these? And there is real questions of control and who is in control of something, and what are their incentives for controlling it. And there's a lot of kind of perverse incentives that get rolled into this when we start thinking about it at scale. Right now it's all these like friendly builders and early VCs, and we're all like in it together, it really feels like, which keeps people aligned, but that's not going to be the way it is forever. And I think the drawback is that it's probably going to also be easy for this stuff to go in a direction that people don't want. Mm-hmm. And then there will be a question of how do you fork something? Can you keep it going if you fork something? What structures could have been there to avoid that being happening in the first place? What should the power structures be aligned with? Should it be aligned with capital? Should it be aligned with users? Some combination of both. The drawbacks I think of are the open questions.
And you brought a couple of them up, just kind of like staying the course of the DAO, and then also this can be the complexity of how complicated it is. I mean, there's 4-person DAOs, there's lots of members within DAOs. Do you see DAOs being like the new legal entity organizational structure moving forward?
So a lot will have to change for a DAO to be, like, for example, a DAO can't enter into a contract. It can't own a trademark, at least at the moment. So when we say legal entity, it's like, what do you want to accomplish? You want to pay a contractor in USDC? Like, great, it's not a legal entity, but you got what you needed to get to. I do think that's where we're going to end up. I think that there's just so much more opportunity to try out new things in existing corporations that we'll probably find something that's a little better.
And then going back to the incentive part and the DAO structure, I feel everybody's aligned, right? Like the investor, the stakeholder. Most of the time. They all are striving for one goal. What about infrastructure, like spinning one up? Do you think we're at a moment where the tooling and everything will come out to make it easier to kind of ramp up on DAOs?
I think it's still pretty early. Okay. It's still pretty expensive, but the tools are much better than they were before. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in that. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in treasury management as well, which is, you have these DAOs with billions of dollars. What do you do with that money? How do you allocate that money to your community? I think that's the real challenge that needs to be figured out, because if you have a lot of capital and you're not allocating it, it's kind of not being productive.
And do you see enterprises and traditional companies dealing with DAOs?
I see them dealing with DAOs. Yeah. I think it's going to be very hard for them to DAOify themselves. Yeah. And they're going to compete with DAOs. And I don't know how effective they'll be competing there.
Any drawbacks to DAOs that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, DAOs they require more energy in terms of, we've got this system of creating an LLC and a company or corporation right now, and that's pretty well figured out. We've got tons of lawyers and law firms and all these things that can help you in the court system, that can help figure out any issues. We just, threw away all that and said, we want to create this in a decentralized way. We have to figure all that out, right? So there's quite a bit of growth and experimentation here. So I think the drawbacks to DAOs are, you need to be more open. You need to learn how to communicate. You need to learn a different skill set than you had before to make this more effective. And there's going to be a lot of screw ups. There's going to be a lot of learnings. But those who figure it out are going to unlock an incredible amount of potential.
So do you follow DAOs, and what are your thoughts on DAOs currently?
Yeah, I guess I'm not paying as much attention to DAOs. They are, I mean, on the positive side, I will say they're definitely something very cool in that they might have seemed impossible, 12 years ago, and now you can actually do them. Whether they're a good idea, like what you gain in terms of not having to sort of have like ambiguous, arbitration go to like legal places where there's kind of unknown outcomes because they're subjective questions. You lose in that like bugs can be just absolutely catastrophic.
What do you mean by bugs in what sense?
Well, I mean, like, for example, look at, the ETC, the Ethereum Classic fork, right? Because there was like literally, the question was like, should we compensate for a bug in a DAO, right?
I only asked because some of our audience wasn't sure you're talking technical, kind of like within the code and the software.
I mean, it's terrifying, right? Like you're writing this software, and the bug bounty is built right into the software. Like if there's any kind of bug, and you can't upgrade it, right? So
I think a lot of these DAOs kind of started off really small, and as they have kind of grown because there's a lot of interest, like how do you coordinate a large group of people at a scale? And that's just like a hard problem in general. Like even for companies as they scale, they go through these struggles, and a lot of that is about organizational structure. So it is like, I think, a problem that a lot of companies or any organization goes through in general. For DAOs, I think good practice still haven't been established. So I think it is even more difficult to kind of do it right at a scale. And we're still in the kind of exploratory phase of how to really DAO at a scalable manner.
Yeah. That social network, right? Are there any drawbacks to DAOs?
There are.
Staying on course, right? If there's a DAO for a specific purpose, an objective, if one veers, maybe some aren't contributing. What are some of the drawbacks that you may anticipate?
I think the drawbacks for DAOs, and I would say DAOs are not for everything. First of all, it has pros and cons. I think the pros is that you can basically try to capture this collective intelligence from the community, and also kind of trying to basically have this ownership mindset to a lot of the DAO members. But that also means that you always need to get a consensus among these DAO members to act on something. And getting a consensus, especially if the scale becomes big, is very costly actually to get to consensus on a specific topic. So as a result, what that means is that from an execution speed perspective, that's going to slow down quite a bit, because you always have to really try to convince the community this is the right thing to do. If there is backlash on that, like you need to convince them, otherwise you need to change the direction. So there's a lot of those kind of back and forth that need to happen. And that's kind of I would say from a product development perspective, it's probably cons, right? If you look at Ethereum, right? Like I'm sure Ethereum would have gone to Ethereum 2.0 much faster if it was run as more like a company. But if Ethereum was run like a company, it probably wouldn't be as big as where it is. So it has pros and cons and trade-offs, but the trade-off is that you probably won't be able to have that kind of execution speed.